Swiftly on to Jehangir Malik, first of all, on this side. From the largest independent Muslim NGO in the world, the UK Director of Islamic Relief, and particularly relevant, beyond all of that, particularly relevant, I think, that amongst all the travelling you've done over the years, in recent months you've been particularly in Somalia. A lot of first-hand experience of that, Jehangir.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think this is a welcome report. Highlights some of what my panelists here are calling challenges in the field of humanitarianism and humanitarian actors. Particularly, of course, as you could imagine, at the forefront of that are Islamic organizations that are operating with a humanitarian mandate. Largely because the areas in which that they've traditionally, or we traditionally operated, are in areas in which that is a high level of political volatility. Afghanistan, Pakistan, Gaza, Somalia, you name it, the list is endless. And so therefore the level of measures that have come into force have not only been challenging but probably disabling and crippling. It's probably more correct terminology to be used in certain circumstances. In the 80s, of course, the Afghan jihad was taking place against the Soviets. When the jihad was won and the Afghans had turned onto themselves, the remainder, the vulnerable, the most vulnerable in the 80s left over in the 90s, were being catered for by a number of aid organizations, but a large majority of Gulf organizations. I was in the area pre-9/11 and the days of Taliban, as it were, and just immediately after I was posted back in 2002 in Afghanistan, and there was hardly a single Islamic humanitarian organization. We probably were the only ones, and often seen with many different eyes, wondering what we were doing there, remaining in operation. But this is the environment in which that Islamic organizations have been working in and living and breathing over the last decade. I'd like to think that our commitment to the core principles of humanitarianism, of providing life-saving aid in the pretext of neutrality and impartiality without taking sides. Our job is to provide assistance, aid and assistance in life-threatening, horrific situations that I've just sort of witnessed. So the real heroes and heroic actions are those humanitarian aid workers who put their lives at risk right at the forefront, not only from both sides of the conflict, but now from the cloud of criminalization because they didn't meet some counter-terrorism measures that have almost made it impossible at times to operate. Many of the areas that I have to concur with our panelists, such as vetting procedures, the transfer of money, OFAC licenses, beneficiary lists, for example, in South and Central Somalia, where we're operating, we're meeting the sort of the needs of about 160,000 people right now. The entire world has rallied around this humanitarian disaster and crisis, quite rightly so, in the Horn of Africa, with the epicenter being in South and Central Somalia. Sadly, this is at often contradiction to the counter-terrorism legislations and mechanisms that are in place that make it very, very difficult, very, very challenging, and almost, like I mentioned, impossible to operate under such circumstances if we're going to tick all the boxes or make sure that we meet all the... And thus, for example, our operation in the United States, family member Islamic Relief United States, is operating under very difficult practical guidelines and directives as opposed to our operation in the United Kingdom. So therefore we've got internal challenges as to where the funding is going to come from. Put aside donor governments for a second. Any donations coming from the United States or the Middle East and making its way across to our operation in South and Central Somalia, after going through all these procedures and mechanisms, still we have a very challenging environment. And this is Islamic Relief, as you mentioned, are members of the Disasters Emergency Committee and has gone through 20-odd years of establishing its credibility as an impartial, neutral organization. But many of the organizations in the Gulf Islamic organizations in the Gulf, or many of the organizations that really haven't been able to build their expertise, capacity, knowledge, brand, reputation, and all the rest of it over the last, as Islamic Relief has, are far cry and far way behind, and are liable to prosecution if the arm of the law was applied in its most strictest terms. So we, as an organization, are trying our level best to engage, dialogue, capacity build, and trying to push the agenda forward, in which that we can try and create an environment where humanitarian aid organizations can do the job that they've set out to do, which is to help in save lives and provide humanitarian assistance in the hour of need. The countries that I've mentioned to you have all they've changed, and you're right. You've got to take it case by case basis, but with the cloud looming of prosecution, whether it's Afghanistan. I mean, we looked at the Pakistan floods. The initial response, even though it's a natural disaster, was very, very slow. It was a slow onset sort of emergency disaster, but there was again the threat of money being transferred to the warring parties against the Pakistani authorities, and the war on terror in the areas of northern Pakistan made it very difficult. So as an humanitarian aid organization, one of the first questions that would be asked is, what are you doing to ensure that you're not getting the aid and assistance in any shape or form to, the Taliban, to, those fighting in the northern areas, to the Hamas, to Shabab. So the names keep changing, but the tune stays the same. And these are some of the mechanisms that we're currently jumping through hoops to try and ensure that we're legally compliant, safe, and not fall into any sort of violation of any rules and laws which are, as mentioned earlier, not clear, open to manipulation, different interpretations, and are challenging at the best of times and crippling at the worst of times. And at the same time, people like the authorities, the Shabab in South Central Somalia, they're not comfortable with us taking beneficiary lists and the likes and getting the details of every single individual that's operating in the area. So that's a no-go area. So that we come to an impasse. And these are the challenging day-to-day, life-threatening decisions and conundrums that we face ourselves between a rock and a hard place. At times, I feel that we're so crippled that we should really be honest with our donors and say, pull out altogether and return everybody's money to their respective donors. But the humanitarian mission continues, and we have to find a way. You said creativity has to kick in. We have to find mechanisms of getting the aid and assistance to the most vulnerable, to those who need, to those who make it to the front end of the screens that we all cry about, and then we claim and then we raise lots of money. But we don't want to be held back because of legislation and laws and a political environment that doesn't allow the flow of income or the flow of money to get to where. And of course, I'm not for 1 minute contradicting the views that mitigation has to be put into place. It's not a wholly transparent black and white world in which that there's good and bad, and there's us and them. I mean, it is not that type of environment. It's one that we have to navigate through. It's a minefield of difficulties, but we have to navigate ourselves through in all these areas that I've mentioned and make it to the people who matter. And if we don't, then in the case of Somalia, you've got 750,000 lives at the risk. And this is not just an emotional plug, but those are real realities of a conflict, of a disaster, which has been going on for the last 2 decades, and which is where we're at this moment in time. So I'm happy to see the United States OFAC pull back and say that this won't hopefully result in a material breach, but we need to see the rest of the departments and to feel suitably confident that we won't be prosecuted, because, like I've mentioned to you, I was operating in the United States, working in the United States, and I've seen many of the organizations shut down overnight. Fortunately, this hasn't been the case in the United Kingdom, but the environment that we're working in, like I said, makes it very, very, very difficult to operate. And I hope that this report will go on to helping, furthering the agenda, protecting and preserving the humanitarian space in which that we as humanitarian actors can go on about our business and trying to help people in their desperate hour of need. The impact on Islamic Relief has been challenging over the last 10 years, and I conclude with the fact with all sectors. I mean, my colleague at Mr. Harun Atallah has extensively contributed to the document. Areas such as the finance sector, the vetting, the beneficiaries, even acquiring counter-terrorism software to vet our donors hasn't been an easy process. Transferring money from from banks here to our countries of operation has not been easy, even though we've gone through all of these measures. So this then naturally puts money and resources and desperate needed supplies in pipelines that are blocked, and then as a result, people's lives at the end of it are affected. And if we're trying to go about creating a more stable, peaceful world, I don't think this is the way that this mechanism is certainly not helping, and that's why we welcome a dialogue and the report that has come about to help us further and protect and preserve the humanitarian agenda. Thank you very much.
Jehangir, thank you very much indeed. Can I just ask you very briefly what impact, something to the question I posed at the beginning, what impact you think that the current Kenyan operation inside Somalia, the one that started yesterday, could have in terms of it already being so difficult to get access to people, as you said, but you're one of the very big.
There is a discussion. There's a discussion that's taking place at this moment in time, Mike, that's saying that if we can't get humanitarian aid and assistance across, then maybe we should look at providing military support to try and get that aid and humanitarian assistance across. I think that further military intervention or further, interventions from the Kenyan side or the Ethiopian side or any other side that's going to intervene, I think is going to further exasperate, the already very explosive situation that we're involved in. And the reality is, I met Mark Bowden, who's the UN coordinator out in Somalia. He said that we've got to take a pragmatic view, and as brave coming from the United Nations at this moment in time, who are perceived as a political, seen as a party to the conflict, as it were. And I think that really the OSCE's involvement, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the member states, the Turkish, the Qataris, and all the likes of big Muslim member states will have to use a diplomatic surge, as one report recently came out with.
The Enough Project report.
Yeah, the Enough Project report says that we must look at an increase in diplomatic surge wherever possible to be able to help avert this major disaster. More military intervention from either sides of outside, I think, is a recipe for disaster.
Extremely interesting. Thank you very much.